Did any of your children show any interest in making hats or getting into craft or something like that?
They're all extremely creative. Like they all do art, they paint, they draw, they sculpt.
Mhm.
They're musicians, and they've all made a hat with me.
Oh! Welcome to Season 2 of the TheKnifeWife podcast. I'm Suz, here with my husband,
Bob Terzuola.
We're professional creatives and entrepreneurs who live, love, and work together. We share our stories to find ourselves in others. P.S. This podcast has little to do with knives. Hey everybody, it's Suz here with my partner,
Bob, that's me.
Bob Terzuola, and another episode of The TheKnifeWife. Today I have an exciting guest with us, but before I introduce her, I wanted to answer some of the questions people have asked us, and I have to thank everyone. We get all kinds of email and private messages on Instagram with wonderful compliments about the podcast and, what they liked about a certain episode. And so I don't read those. I feel like it's patting ourselves on the back, but I do want to acknowledge the people who write them to us, and I always write them back and thank them that it's really been, people are listening and they're paying attention, and that's a lucky thing for us, I guess. One of our questions was, how do we get to be a guest on the show? There's a couple ways. You can either write me at eccentricsuz.com, my website. You can click on and contact me through there, or Eccentric Suz on Instagram, or Bob's last name, which no one can spell, Terzuola Design on Instagram. And one of those ways you can get a hold of me. If you think outside the box, which for me, I don't know where the box is. So I like people who think outside the box, who are entrepreneurs, who are craftsmen, who are creatives, and we call ourselves professional creatives because we make things, right, Bob?
Mm-hmm.
Bob makes knives, and I make trouble. So we've had all kinds of people on. We just had someone completely different out of the box, government, pilot and helicopter pilot. But so I'm welcome anybody. Lately, I've been doing stand-up comedy, and I've met some great comedians, and so they've been on the show. What else, Bob? I'm still Bob's participation trophy wife. He met me later in life, so he got one with a few bumps and nicks and dents. What can I say? We're two people who were born before seatbelts.
We've straightened that out pretty much. We've gotten rid of most of the dents.
Really? Okay. We're just from the mid-century, both of us. And so this podcasting has been a way for us. We used to listen to radio, and Bob still listens to the radio a lot. But podcasts have been a way to bring that back that I really enjoy. And we're produced by a company called A Different Day Radio out of Vista, California. And Zeke really has an ear and an eye for things, and I've really appreciated his vision. And so we're in a great studio that produces all kinds of things. They're going to produce my comedy special at the end of the year. We'll see if anyone buys it, if Netflix buys it, or whoever. And I'm excited about that. What else, Bob?
Let's get talking to Jessi.
Okay, so
I'm
today...
really interested in her craft and making hats. That's something I've always been fascinated with. There was a hat maker that I knew. I think his name was Murphy in Santa Fe.
Santa Fe, yeah. I used to buy hats from a place in Santa Fe years ago. Today we have Jessi Lloyd with us, and she is, I would say, a milliner, a hat maker. I don't know, Jessi. Hi, Jessi. Tell us what to call you.
Yes, so I just call myself a hat maker.
Okay.
I feel like milliner kind of has that, milliners traditionally are making ladies' hats, and which I can do, and I do occasionally, like derby hats and all of that. But I'm primarily doing, wide brim, fedora, Western. So I just call myself a hat maker.
Okay. Yeah, that milliner is kind of a Frenchy thing. And I see some, tulle or some feathers or whatever. Although if you check her out, her website, what's your website, Jessi?
GrayCollectiveHats.com.
Gray Collective. And she's also on Instagram.
Yes.
And if you look at I don't know who took the photos. I don't know if you take the photos, but the photos are gorgeous. And the hats, you can get, I'm from the Midwest, you can get a Wisconsin wooden cheese box.
Mm-hmm.
To put your hat in, and which is to me, I just want the box too. What a great idea!
Does it come with the cheese? Do you get the
No.
cheese? No?
It's for an extra fee.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about you. How did you grow up? Were you from an artsy family? Were you an art major? Were you always interested in making things? I mean, for Bob and I, we've been making things since we were little kids. We were always making something.
So I have always been a creative. I didn't necessarily come from a creative family.
Mm-hmm.
I do have creative people in my family, but they weren't really a part of my normal life.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always encouraged to follow my creativity to an extent.
Oh, yeah. How are we going to
'Cause-
monetize that? My parents would
yeah.
say. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because once, when I started getting older, I was always very crafty. I
Mm-hmm.
loved to draw. I loved to take things apart and put things
Mm-hmm.
back together. But the older I got, the more my parents were like, okay, like that's nice, but now you
Mm-hmm.
need to start thinking about like a real job.
Mm-hmm. My parents used to say something you could fall back on, which absolutely kills all creative drive or whatever. And I
Yes.
got to tell you, Jessie, I've had a lot of jobs, costuming included, where it was something to fall back on, but it was not my love. It was not
hmm
what I love to do.
Absolutely. And that's what my resume is very long of from jobs that were
Mm-hmm.
not creative jobs. I actually became a massage therapist
Mm.
and did that for some time before I really dove into my creative career. Actually, I never planned on being a hat maker. I actually never wore hats before I started making hats.
And I wore hats. I grew up and I was raised. We had a housekeeper, and my parents. I was a late in life baby, and she just called me number 13. She had all these kids, and I used to go to her church on the west side of Chicago, and it was a Baptist church, and all the ladies had the most beautiful hats that matched all of their outfits. So I have loved hats. And I have a ton of hats, and I don't wear as many as I used to on the set. I wore them all the time.
Very nice.
But I understand. When did you really, know, like at what age did you know, I'm gonna do something with my hands. This is really my thing.
It I think from a very young age, I knew that in some capacity I was gonna be an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I never really enjoyed working for other people in
Mm-hmm.
all of the jobs that I did. And I, had been making things with my hands from a very, very young age. I actually was a seamstress starting at 19.
Mm-hmm.
I just started taking sewing gigs, but I didn't necessarily have the confidence in myself to, do fully custom work or do anything like hat making more than a hobby until, gosh, I was in my 20s. So it took
Yeah.
me a little bit to figure out like, oh, I'm capable. I can
Mm-hmm.
do these things. I don't have to have an office job.
Oh,
So
office
but yeah.
jobs. Oh. Yes, and that's pretty young. A lot of people, I've done a lot of things, creative things, but a lot of people in their 20s don't have the confidence to do that. So hats off to you. That's a terrible pun. Um,
Thank you.
so how did you get to be Gray Hat Collective? And who are your customers? That's what I want to know. How do you get customers?
So I actually don't know how I get customers because I don't advertise. Uh,
Mm-mm, the
so
hats do.
so it's primarily word of mouth where I'm getting all of my customers.
Mm-hmm.
And then, social media, people are just kind of stumbling upon me.
Oh, yeah.
And so Gray Collective was inspired by my late husband. He had brain cancer, and after his first surgery, he had a big scar on the side of his head
Mm-hmm.
from a brain tumor removal, and he was looking for a hat. He was an attorney, and so he couldn't wear his ball cap to work.
Right.
And so we were looking all over for a hat, and the man had the most expensive taste that I've ever encountered. We're young, he's recovering from brain surgery, and we have young children, and he's looking at $2,000 hats, and I'm like, "Excuse me, sir. Let's reel this in a little bit."
Mm-hmm.
But I was a seamstress at the time, and so in his mind, he was like, "Well, just make me a hat. You can
Sure.
make me a hat, right?"
Sure.
He had an obscene amount of confidence in my making abilities, which I
Nice.
really appreciated.
Mm.
Um, but that took me down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out how to make a hat. I made him a not so great hat initially,
We gotta start
but he
somewhere,
loved
Jessi.
it and he
Uh-huh.
wore it.
Mm.
And then I was like, oh, I've got to redeem myself. I have to make you a better hat than this.
What was the first hat like? Can you describe it?
It was a gray cowboy hat. I
Mhm.
got all the wrong materials. So I had a really terrible quality felt that I was working with. I didn't have the right size, like, hat block. I didn't even
Right.
really know what a hat block was back then. Um, so just all the wrong tools. It was a very ill-fitted, not great looking hat.
And now you make them out of beaver hide, right? Is that what they make the hats out of?
So now I work with beaver felts. Yes.
Mhm.
So we don't
Mhm.
have any of, like, the skin or anything. It's just the fur.
Mhm.
Um, and so I work in beaver, nutria, and rabbit.
Mm. Okay.
Do you buy this material in sheets? Is it already felted?
So it's already felted together. All of the fur comes pre-felted, and they come in what are called hat blanks. And so they're kind of in a rough hat shape. They're not to any specific size. They're just kind of a dome, and you'll use all of your tools to pull them to an actual hat.
Oh, I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Well, there's the internet, which is a good thing these days, you know?
Yes.
So, okay, so you made the first hat, then you wanted to redeem yourself and make a better hat.
And I made him a better hat,
Mhm.
which he wore proudly. And that kind of started stirring up the interest where it was his boss saw his hat and was like, "Hey, where'd you get that hat?" And he's like, "Oh, Jess made it." And then he wanted a hat. And so I
Mm.
made him a hat. And then his sons wanted hats. And then their friends wanted hats. And then strangers wanted hats. And it became where I was getting more hat orders than I was sewing gigs.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, maybe this is something I should lean into.
Mhm.
And at the time, I was really kind of trying to figure out a way to support my husband through his brain cancer journey, in a sense of what was something I could do, not to just help him, but also help myself mentally
Mhm.
and get through everything we were going through. Um, and so I knew that I wanted to do something to financially help the brain cancer community. And so I thought, if
Mhm.
I'm going to start something, I want it to be to benefit the brain cancer community. And so Gray Collective comes from gray is the color for brain cancer awareness,
Mhm.
but also my married name is Lloyd, and that in Welsh translates to the gray one or the gray.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was kind of felt very meant to be that I had gray in the name. And so I just came up with Gray Collective as my business name so that it's always tied to the brain cancer community.
That's great. And so you're making hats, and your husband had. I've sort of stalked you when I first found you, so I've read everything I could Google and find articles about you. The bravery is really what really gets me. Is your bravery.
Thank you.
I'm getting kind of verklempt right now because one, I had a brother who died of cancer a few years ago, and I took care of him for many years. We took care of him. And so I know what that's like to watch something bigger than you, stronger than you, take someone's life, and there is nothing you can do about it, really, except do donate stuff to pancreatic cancer research. So he had the one brain tumor removed, and tell us, so you're making hats all this time, and how many kids do you have at this point?
We have 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
So my youngest, he was actually born after his second brain tumor removal.
Yeah, so he had 2 brain tumors, and then he had proton radiation, right?
Mhm. So he in total, before he passed away, he had a total of 4 tumors,
Mhm,
um, 3 which were removed.
mhm,
He did have a bout of proton radiation and chemo,
mhm,
and then ended up foregoing any of that kind of treatment for
mhm.
his last tumor.
Yeah, and when cancer, people who don't know about it, but I was married to someone else before Bob. He was the head of cancer research at a big hospital in Chicago, and what I learned was when cancer comes back at a certain point, it comes back with a vengeance.
Yes.
And that's what happened to my brother. They knocked it down, they got rid of it, and then when it came back, he was like, oh no, well, no more treatment, no more, I just want to live my life. So tell us a little bit about, or how, I don't know, a little bit about, there's probably a lot to tell, how you handled this, what you did for support. I mean, this is no easy thing for a mom of 4.
I am very fortunate that we both come from very large families.
Mm-hmm.
I have 5 sisters and a brother, and he has 3 brothers and a sister.
Mm.
So our families were a huge support, and we were able to lean on them. And after he passed, I was, just surrounded by people who were ready to jump in and help me in any way that they could and support my kids in any way that they could.
Mm-hmm.
This is something I've talked about on a few platforms. I'm not sure if I've done it on any podcasts. But, when my husband passed away, it was a really trying time because a few months after COVID hit. So it was like, my world just ended.
Sure.
My husband died, and then the world shut down. And it really did feel like, the apocalypse was happening. Like, this is what the end of the world is.
Yeah.
And so I think myself, and I know I've met so many people who had similar situations during COVID, turning to not so healthy coping mechanisms for
Mm-hmm.
things,
Mm-hmm.
drinking a little too heavily,
Mm-hmm.
turning towards vices that aren't necessarily going to help you work through things, but just temporarily make you forget about the things.
Yeah.
And so that, was a rough couple of months. And
Mm-hmm.
it's something that, I do speak openly about that because I don't want anyone to feel alone in those
Yeah.
situations where
Yeah.
they feel guilty that they turned to those things, or they felt like they should have been stronger, because we all deal with things in our own way.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I'm so grateful that I was able to not go too far down that rabbit hole, and that I had a support system that helped me, get back on my feet. And my children didn't have to lose 2 parents because
Yes.
one, checked out to alcoholism or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that. But I know a lot of people who did go deeper. I've connected with a lot of widows who also lost their husbands to brain cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't all have the support system that I had. And so I always let people know that, hey, like, I didn't go through all of this with as much grace as some people think that I did.
I think you did. Well, I don't know what happened, but I mean, I don't know the particulars, but I think considering, how do you cope with that? My goddaughter, I just talked to her today. Her boyfriend of 7 years developed cancer and died within weeks. They had no time to prepare.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a hard anniversary for her, and she went through a very similar thing. And then one day she said, this isn't working.
Yep.
This isn't helping me. And so she's very vocal about that as well, and has shared with lots of other people about this. And she comes from, some of her family members were like, no, here, have another drink. And she's like, no, you don't understand that it's making it worse, actually.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And, with my brother, I had a long time to prepare, a long time. Not that, but 2.5 years. But I knew that when he got diagnosed that, they told him 3 to 6 months, and he lived. Nobody dies on my watch. I used to tease him that, you're not going to die. Nobody dies on my watch, but, I knew he was going to. But I had time, and I had, I was also older and had lived through losing a child, losing all kinds of things. So I had resources, and we had some good friends that were helpful. And I have to say, Bob, my husband, was incredibly supportive. Not all husbands would be, but he really was. So, okay, so you come out of that, you're like, okay, sober in the middle of COVID, which, COVID's a lot. And the kids are probably at home, not at school, right?
Yes.
Because New Mexico was shut down for a long time.
How old were they? The
So
children.
my oldest, she was 12. And then my second daughter, if she was 12, then she was 10. And then 7 and 3.
They're all home together.
Yes.
And in the meantime, you're making hats, correct?
Yes. So I had been making hats. I did take the 2020 off of making hats.
Mhm.
I was kind of making, but not really. Like, I wasn't taking orders.
Yeah.
I definitely just like checked out for 2020.
Sure.
I think I logged into my Instagram 2 times in 2020. And so I kind of took the year to really figure out my life and be there for my kids, and do all of that kind of healing, really allowing myself the space to grieve without it being too public.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, thing about social media is that, you don't have to check in. Nobody has to know where you're at. Nobody has to know anything. So
Yeah.
at some point, though, you opened a store.
Yes.
So that's after 2020, probably.
It's a little bittersweet. I just closed the
I
store.
know.
I had it for 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
and it was wonderful in so many ways. And in a lot of ways, it wasn't.
Right. I grew up in
You
a
know-
gift shop. My mother owned a gift shop, and I was like a kid who went not home after school. I went to the gift shop after school because
Yep.
that's where my mother was. Well, one thing I will say is what you taught your older daughters for sure is about being a businesswoman that later in life, I learned this. I didn't even know I was learning it from my mother. I had the only mother at that time. This was, this is the 60s. And I'm that's a long time ago. And fathers were at work and mothers were at home. And my mother was at work at her store. And what she taught me was so much about business that I didn't even know I was learning. So good for you.
Absolutely. And that's what my kids, they're all very entrepreneurial in their own ways. Like two of my daughters have a business that they've been running together for, 7 years now.
Wow. Wow.
And so they haven't done a market in a little while. But they used to be at every single pop-up market in town, where people didn't even know me as Jessi from Greg Collective. They're like, "Oh, you're Bug and Bear's mom." So they did better at the markets than I did here in Albuquerque.
That's great. Well, as a kid, I worked and there was a candy store and I made a gingerbread village every year that they paid me to do, which I would have done it for free. I just loved it. I had people making candy for me to decorate everything with or they'd pay me in the town to do the paint, the windows with soap and like poster paint. And so I was always doing that. And they would say to me, "Oh, you're Susie's mom." And she'd say, "Yeah, I own a store in town." "Oh, really? Where is that?"
Yeah.
I had no idea. So anyway, that's a great story. That's great. So you had the store for 3 years, but I bet you were pulled in many directions because you got to be open.
Yes. And so I realized very early on that maintaining traditional store hours, I'm not really the type that enjoys that. The reason I really pursued running the business the way I do is so that I could have the freedom, to dictate my own schedule, to be at all my kids' activities, to be able to go on vacations when we want to go on vacations. And I learned that the way I had the business structured, having an employee in the shop wasn't really worth it, because people come in and they want to meet with the hat maker.
Yeah, they want
They don't
you.
want to just be there with an employee. They want to see me. So it wasn't worth the money having someone keep the store open if I wasn't there.
Right. It's very similar. Bob's Knives, they want him. I run.
Yes.
I'll be at the tables at shows, and I can tell them they're hi, nice to see you, but I can see him looking around because where is he if he's not at the table? And so I understand that very much so. With the store, because you are the maker. I mean, there's nobody else helping you.
Jessi, I want to know, do any of your children show any interest in making hats or getting into craft or something like that?
So they're all extremely creative. Like they all do art, they paint, they draw, they sculpt. They're musicians, and they've all made a hat with me.
Oh, great.
And my middle daughter, she always says that, when I'm older, I'm going to take over your hat business.
Oh, well, that's nice.
Because she also has a lot of other interests. So we'll see if the hats are still her thing.
Yeah. Well,
Great.
what I learned in work growing up in a retail store was when my mother was ready to sell the store that I did not want to come there 9 to 5. It was 6 days a week. Back then, there were no Sundays hours. And Bob's sons never wanted to make knives like he does. And my kids don't want to do art like I've always done. They're not really interested in it at all, although my son is incredibly creative. But Bob's son is really pretty artsy, and I knew that when I first met him. Bob and I are like, late, and I joke that I'm his participation trophy wife. But I got to meet this kid, and I saw things he had done and sculptures he'd made, and I always encouraged him. He was getting a degree in English or something. I said, what are you going to do with that? And so he's always had the entrepreneurial spirit, which he got from Bob. And now he married a woman who's very much an artist and a risk taker like he is, because to be an entrepreneur, you got to be a risk taker, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And now they're in Guatemala, and they
Oh,
own
wow.
this Hobbit. They started, when he told us that they were going to start a Hobbit hotel and restaurant, we were like, what? You're going to what? Stop, put that weed down. What are you talking about? And he did, and it became the number one tourist attraction in Guatemala. But then he had a
Oh,
partner, and partnerships don't work out, so he was bought out. And now he has a secondhand store because he does love to thrift. And on top of it, he's put a school bus and a Volkswagen van, that are going to be Airbnb hotels out of a school bus.
wow.
And they have old, what do they call those boats, Bob?
They call them cayucos. The cayuco is like a 10 to 12-foot dugout canoe. And
Oh,
the bus that they put on top of the building is what they call a chicken bus. If you can imagine a school bus. This is down in Guatemala, the major public transportation between cities, especially, is like a school bus. And the buses are painted all sorts of garish colors you've probably seen on television. Some of these crazy colors and everything.
When we were there, I wanted to go on one, Jesse. They look like so much fun. There's people hanging off the back of them. There's chickens on the bus. There's goats on the
There's
bus. I was like,
chickens,
I want to go
goats,
on there. They're
pigs,
like, no.
everything. They're fun. I used to ride them all the time when I lived down there. But they took the engine and the drivetrain out, so it didn't weigh that much, They put that up there, and then on top of it, they put a Volkswagen bus, also hollowed out.
oh, wow. On top of that bus.
Yeah, the dugout, and they're pretty old. They're about 50 years old, these dugout canoes, which was, kind of river transportation down there. And those are going to be the bunk beds.
Wow.
My son, I don't know where he gets these ideas from, but he is very creative. So is Anna, his wife. He loves making things. We always made things in my shop. Never knives. He and my first son were never really interested in making knives, but they always had projects to do and school projects, and we worked on them together.
Very nice. My husband was actually trying to teach himself knife making before he passed away. So I have a
Really?
forge and a bunch of different tools. And I eventually have told myself that I will learn how to make a knife, whether I just make one or
Well, maybe someday you could come down to San Diego and we can
yeah,
work together and you can make a knife in my shop.
that would be incredible.
Yeah, I have made knives with quite a few people, who are not knife makers.
Hmm.
In fact, I had one fellow, Neil, he wanted to get into selling knives, being a purveyor of knives.
Hmm.
And he came to my shop in Santa Fe and not very adept at anything craft-wise or anything. He was,
He
he
never
was,
used a tool in his
yeah,
life.
but so I brought him into the shop and I said, now look around. We have here the milling machine and drill presses. And these are the grinders over here.
Hmm.
I said, what have you used before? Have you? And he looked
Nothing.
around and he said, the telephone. That was
I've
the extent of his knowledge. But he made in a week two very nice folding knives. They were actually pretty good.
very
Yeah. So
nice.
you'd be welcome to come on down.
Oh, he
And
loves to teach. He's a natural-born teacher, Jesse.
yeah, I do.
Very nice. Yeah, I would love that. That's what I've said that I'll make at least one in my life.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And Bob set up, he's taught a couple gals from New Mexico, one from Albuquerque, Lydia,
Oh, cool.
Oh, yeah. He's taught a lot of people, and there's a big knife community in Albuquerque. Big.
Yes.
There is. And in fact, we know someone, Michael might be a person to teach her too. He's
Michael.
in the North Valley.
Yeah.
Anyway, so where were we? Oh, so now you have the store, and you're juggling keeping a store open or an employee or whatever, and you're like, oh, this is not sustainable.
Yes. I learned that pretty quickly, but I stayed for 3 years. Like, I think I learned those lessons in the first year, but
Yeah.
definitely made it work. And then it was time to renew the lease, and I was kind of like, well, I don't think I want to renew this lease. Because also it was wonderful for just a studio space
Mm-hmm.
and having a place to teach my workshops. But retail wise, I'm paying for, a retail space rent
Yeah.
for an area that was not, it had no foot traffic.
Yeah.
So you had to seek me out if you were going to come
Right.
to my shop. I maybe had 5 people wander in a week.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so it just wasn't an ideal location if I wanted it to be an actual retail space.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to close shop for 2025, but I have a really exciting opportunity coming up in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not allowed to share too much of the info just yet. Just that
Sounds like film to me.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's a lot of things in the work, contracts still being written,
Mm-hmm.
all of that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of really exciting things happening next year. Well, they're
Mm-hmm.
happening now, but they won't be open to the public until 2026. And so that's something I'm going to slowly start putting out teasers and,
Good. I'm excited.
yeah, getting people excited for what's coming next year.
And my question is, you're the hat maker, but do you license your designs or do you sell them to other people? How does that work? I mean, there's only one you.
Yep. So there's just one me. So all of my hats are one of a kind.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I'm doing a replica of a hat,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be pretty unique. I'll try not to make it exact.
Mm-hmm.
That way, every hat can still be one of a kind.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do any licensing or anything like that. I learned when I was a seamstress, trying to license or trademark or do anything in fashion was really just a big waste of money because people just had to change one little thing.
Right. Right. Well, for trademarks and patents, but licensing, as an artist, I've learned a lot in my old age. And if, I don't know who comes to you, some Ann Taylor comes to you, or no, it would be a Western place probably.
Oh, yeah.
We want this hat, and we have a company that can make them for us and whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
we'll give you so much per hat, and we'll guarantee you that we're going to make 5,000 hats.
Oh, wow. So I've
Okay.
never been approached by anyone about that type
All
of
right.
work. I have, I do wholesale orders
Mm-hmm.
and consignment, but they're
Mm-hmm.
all being handmade by me.
Yeah.
And again, every hat is one of a kind.
Right. So when we're not on the podcast, I'd love to have a conversation with you because I've been teaching this to other artists that licensing, not patenting or not
Mm-hmm.
trademarking, but a license contract is really a way to scale your business because you cannot duplicate yourself and you only have so many hours and you have 4
Yes.
kids and, you have a life. It's a really good way to do that. And I know you have something else in the works and I'm really excited about that, but there's only one Jessi. So, how do we
Mm-hmm.
get more
Yes.
with the same amount of people? So
Mm-hmm.
are there any other hat makers locally? I mean, they could work for you, that could do this?
So not in Albuquerque.
Mm-hmm.
In Santa Fe, there are quite a few.
Mm-hmm.
And then in other parts of New Mexico, I know there are. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't met them personally. I've
Mm-hmm.
met a few of the ones in Santa Fe.
Mm-hmm.
The hat making world is, we're pretty small.
I bet. Yeah.
There is a really great community of hat makers
Mm-hmm.
who are open and kind
Mm-hmm.
and like to collaborate and work together. But then
Mm-hmm.
there's also I think just like any industry, some that would rather keep to themselves and not
Yeah.
work with others.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's tough to find people to bring in that sense. I know I
Mm-hmm.
am hoping to train hat makers under
Mm-hmm.
me eventually.
That daughter.
Yes. Right. Yeah. My oldest is already like, you can train me.
Mm-hmm. Well, if they can do piecework or whatever for you, I
Hmm.
mean, I was going to ask you, what is the hardest part about making a hat?
Oh gosh. For me, the hardest part is lining the hat just because
Ah,
it's the most time consuming.
mm-hmm,
But I teach a lot. And
mm-hmm,
so for my students, I would say shaping
mm-hmm.
is difficult for a good amount of people. And then also lining the hat
Yeah.
properly is this probably the second hardest thing for my students.
Mm-hmm. Years ago, when I was an art therapist, I worked with women who had different types of cancer, and most of them had lost their hair because of chemo. Now we have cold caps, and so you can keep your hair if the place you're getting if the kind of chemo you're getting was, cold caps would help. But I used to hire a milliner in Chicago to come in, and they all made their own hats. And then I had someone come and teach them how to wrap their heads in scarves. And then I had another person do all kinds of body ornamentation, like a tattoo artist. And it was very fulfilling for me. It was very gratifying to see them feel beautiful again after not feeling beautiful.
Hmm.
Anyway, so when you teach, is you teach people who want to make hats? Do you do work for organizations where people need to ornament their bodies or?
Most of my students are people who are wanting to become hat makers.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a small percentage of people who are just coming just to have the experience
Mm-hmm.
of making their own hat.
I want to. I have to know. I want to make my own hat.
Hmm.
So okay, I have to. I'm stalking you now. So now the next time you have a thing, I have to go to it to make a hat. Maybe Bob will go too because he's very handy as well.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. I would
So,
love
but
that.
yeah, most over the past 3 years, almost everyone who comes to learn, they're coming to learn to start a business.
Mm-hmm. I have enough businesses. I just want to make a hat.
Jesse, do you offer a variety of hat bands?
I do.
Special hat band? I know in New Mexico you probably get a lot of snakeskin if you wanted to.
Hmm.
Oh, cool.
I have a snakeskin, so all of my snakeskin bands are from snakes that I have killed and skinned and tanned
Mm,
their hides myself.
yeah, we know a Navy SEAL here who does that. He made his mother a snake stew for Mother's Day.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I don't think I would want that, but but she loved it. Anyway, so he's always doing stuff with it, and I thought, oh, he should use hat bands. Is what I thought.
Yeah.
So, and in New Mexico, there's lots of snakes, especially in
Yes.
October. They're on every road you go drive down.
Hmm.
So,
Yes, they're everywhere.
Do you ever get any hat bands made like of woven with beads, like Indian type of beads
Hmm.
and stuff like that?
Yes. So, I used to do all my own beadwork, but I'm
mm-hmm.
a very slow beader. So
Me
I
too.
I was like, I'm losing money on these hat
Yes.
bands because
Right. Yeah, I could see that.
if I charged what it took me in time, it'd be a $5,000 hat band.
Right. Right. I get you.
So I finally a few years ago started working with a local woman who she just loves to bead and she can bead 20 bands in a week.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Whereas
Yeah.
I could do one band in 3 months.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just so slow.
And I learned about bead machines. I saw a bead machine that you can just, if you're doing straight things, whatever, like for a
Mhm.
hat band. I saw this woman, I think it was an Indian market. She was using one of these machines, and I was fascinated with it. I said, why didn't I know about that when I was trying to bead at
Right?
the speed of maple syrup coming out of a tree?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So with the beaded work, I source that out now, but all of my leather bands and silver work and everything is still done by me.
Yeah, you're a jeweler. I saw some work that you did. Beautiful work.
Thank
So I
you.
was thrilled. Absolutely thrilled. And what else was I going to ask you? So you've told us about some things that are coming up for Gray Collective Hats. Couldn't really tell us, but I can only imagine because I know about the non-disclosure things, but that's really exciting. And so where are you making the hats now? Do you have a studio at home?
So right now I have moved back into my garage,
Ah,
which
mm-hmm,
is challenging. I before I had my shop, that's where I was working out of.
mm-hmm.
But I got spoiled having the space that I did. I
Yeah.
was in a 1,300 square foot
Mm,
shop and now I'm back in my one car garage.
okay.
So it's definitely been a challenge to readjust,
Mm-hmm,
but I'm finally, getting back in my groove. It took the last couple weeks of December and the first couple weeks of January to get fully moved out of my space, of my retail space, and moved into my garage. And so I'm just now, over the past week and a half, starting to get back to making again.
Yeah, and it is kind of a nice commute to work, right?
Yes, just walk out my side door.
Yes. And Bob, when I met him, we were in Santa Fe, and he had his garage our cars have never seen the garage at any of our houses. They're like, what is that? And so then when we moved to Albuquerque, we bought a bigger house together, and he had a huge 4-car garage. It was four. It was
4 plus.
Four. It was the biggest garage I've ever seen. And he loved that. And then when we moved to California, he was in an industrial space, and he had about 1,300 square feet, which was nice. I mean, it was a good sized shop.
But it was cold.
It was cold, and there's, it was cement, and there was no heat, and he was freezing. And I said, oh, no, we got to get him back in the house. So we were able to afford to buy a house with a 3-car garage, which in Southern California is, but, and no HOAs because they'd throw us out the first grinder he turned on. So now he's back in the garage, our cars, look at it every day, wonder what goes on in there. And he walks through the laundry room to get to work every day. And, that's really nice. And I have my studio at home, and I can't say enough about that, I don't know, it used to be that way before the Industrial Revolution. And I think we're gone. COVID pushed us back to that. And I think it's nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
I agree.
So, and it's nice for kids to see what their parents are doing. When they work out of the house, kids have no idea. But parents had to come to school for parents, job day and explain what they did to kids. It's hard to explain. I mean, unless you're a doctor or something. So, so I think you're in the right direction. And maybe with this thing on the horizon, you'll be able to build a bigger garage.
Yes.
So, well, we're almost out of time, but Jessi, I'm going to talk to you more about licensing when we're not doing this because I'm a whiz at it. I license all Bob's knife designs to companies all over the world because now he's 80 and he does not make a lot of knives like he used to, and I don't think he could make enough that could support California, that's for sure. We need our knife deals. And to support his crazy wife who's now doing stand-up comedy.
I love that.
Yes, well, 69, I might as well. I mean, when am I going to do it? Anyway, so here we go.
What is her website again where people can see
her website and her Instagram? Yeah, let's tell us that again, Jessi.
Instagram.
Yes. So my website is just graycollectivehats.com. And then on all of the social media platforms, and just at Gray Collective Hats. Okay.
All right. We wish you all the best. And we're going to come to New Mexico. We usually come once a year. I don't know if we're going to come again in April. We came last year.
Great.
That maybe we can meet you. And I would love to, Bob would wear the hat before I will wear the hat. I have a hot head.
I would love to see your shop. Do you call it a shop or a studio?
So now it's in my garage, so it's just a studio.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much. And, what can I say? I can't, all my New Mexico friends are going to be Googling you in a minute, I know. So I hope other sales come from this, and we look forward to what's happening in your future. Sounds pretty exciting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great talking to you, Jessi.
You too. It was so great being on here, and thank you guys so much.
All the best to you, sweetie. Well, that's it for today.
Bye-bye.
Bye, fun Bobby.
Arrivederci.
All right. Keep your hat on. Thanks for listening. If you like what you're hearing, please share this with a friend and subscribe where you listen to podcasts. Support our efforts through Patreon at TheKnifeWife, and for all Terzuola goodness, go to terzuola.net. And remember, if you're not laughing, you're not living. Comments and questions can be made on Instagram at TheKnifeWife Podcast or our Facebook group, The KnifeWife Podcast. And if you're a couple who work together and would like to be on our podcast, tell us about yourself with an email at eccentricsuz.com or terzuola.net.